Hello, everyone. I think Father Gregory Boyle was trauma-informed before we even knew what trauma-informed care was, really. So I'm going to talk about the impact of trauma on the brain because it is critical if we want to change systems of care as well. So what is trauma? So according to Judith Herman defines trauma as experiencing intense fear, helplessness, loss of control, and threat of annihilation. So if you think about this definition, this isn't just some marginalized group out there. This is all of us. And having that understanding is critical also if you want to think about how we're going to change policies, because oftentimes policies violate biology. So we really want to be critical of understanding the behaviors versus focusing on the behaviors and giving consequences to the behaviors. We want to understand this is what trauma can look like. So I encourage anyone who hasn't read the book Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman to check that book out if you ever have time to read. It is the Bible of trauma, if you want to do that on your side time. So I want everyone to remember that the brain can heal at any time of life. The brain is more like skin, where it can heal. We have to just know how to heal the brain. So when our brains are fully developed, for women it's around 25, 26, for men it's 29, we can still change our brains even after it's fully developed. So it's more like if you think about a four-year-old who's experienced trauma, his brain will be more impacted than me, who's over 26. Now, it's the same gene that makes that four-year-old more resilient than me as well with the right support. And I think we have to really be aware of using that word resilience in connection to having safe relationships and having that support. Obviously, everyone in this room has had some type of support to arrive in this room. So, I should probably ask if there's a neurologist in the room, because you will know more than me, and it would be helpful if we co-facilitate. So, I encourage everyone to learn about the brain in a very simplistic way. And I've always taught the brain to parents and to children as young as 4, because it really helps to understand the impact of trauma on the brain and that we're not crazy. So I don't know how I'm going to do this with, thanks. Okay, so if you guys all put your hands like this, where your thumb is underneath your fingers, probably most of you have, it's getting so close. Probably a lot of you know the mobile hand brain. Yeah. So this was created by Dr. Daniel Siegel, who's a neuropsychiatrist at UCLA. So as a simplistic way, just to learn about the brain, you can remember it either lower, my thumb is the mid, and my fingers are the upper. So you could do lower, mid, and upper brain, or it could be lower, which is the reptilian brain. That's where breathing is, heart rate, digestion. The mid part of the brain is the limbic. That is where every relationship we have ever had is stored. So don't freak out too much, because we can change the brain, so we can actually change the limbic. So if we are constantly dating the same person over and over and over, it makes sense, because this is a blueprint for relationships. It's a blueprint also for feelings that were repeated over and over in childhood. So if you all know someone who comes to work really frustrated all the time, there's a good chance that they experienced frustration or even anger in childhood. I wish I knew this many years ago when I worked with a colleague, because I was not very empathetic to every single day coming to work being angry. Now I probably would have a little bit more empathy, understanding, because what happens in the limbic, there's a part of the limbic, if you don't remember anything else today, called the amygdala. Now when we are experiencing stress, the stress hormone cortisol is secreted, and our amygdala gets activated and hijacks the brain where we flip our lid. And when we flip our lid, so we either go into fight, freeze, or flee response, right? When we flip our lid, this lid is the higher brain. So in the neocortex, that's where planning happens. That's where strategy, learning, this is all happening in the upper brain. So think about school. Schools are expecting students to come to school in their higher brain. But if they just experienced violence in the home, in their community, they're in their amygdala. So a lot of students, if they're experiencing this kind of stress and trauma, they are maybe walking around like this. They're about to flip their lid. So you're just walking around, and at any moment, there's going to be a behavior that is going to happen that there may not be a response to empathy. So it's critical that policies understand the impact of trauma on the brain so we can integrate empathy into our policies. Oh, thanks. That's great. So calming the amygdala. If you are in your amygdala, we need to speak amygdala. So it's like if someone's speaking Spanish, you're not going to start speaking German, right? So if someone's in their amygdala, you want to speak amygdala. So regulating your nervous system or regulating your amygdala, art is incredibly healing and calms the amygdala. Drumming, just to say, you want to be really aware, obviously, where you're doing this, because someone's like, I'm not going to drum in court. You won't be drumming in court, but you can definitely sipping liquids, non-alcoholic liquids. I have to now say that. Regulates the nervous system. So even if you're not thirsty, I encourage you guys all to be drinking water. Breathing, running, grounding exercises, these all regulate the nervous system and the amygdala. So think about systems that focused on calming the amygdala versus giving consequences to the amygdala. So I know this is not shocking, but I think it's a really powerful quote. People with childhood histories of trauma, abuse, and neglect make up almost the entire criminal justice population in the US. As a side note, there are a couple trauma-informed prisons, actually. One is in Norway and one is in Germany. And it's interesting, the one in Norway, they don't have shackles, they don't have barbed wire. Someone said to me it's more like a resort. They don't have many AWOLers because they actually like being there. It's about focus on the healing. They can go out and work, and they return at night. And they have one of the lowest recidivism rates in the world. So empathy changes the biology of the brain. So when we are not using empathy, so I'm just going to skip for a second. It goes to suspensions, expulsions, incarcerations, injunctions, exclusions. This is why we need to integrate empathy into the biology. We need to integrate empathy into our policies so that we can change the biology of the brain. So I thought this was a powerful quote. If both sides simply reflect what the other person said before they speak, they arrive at conflict resolution 50% faster just by repeating. There's actually an empathy museum, by the way, that was just developed. So if you guys are interested in that, just Google Empathy Museum, Roman Kresnik. This is another powerful quote from Dr. Bruce Perry, who has a trauma academy in Texas. From birth, we seek intimate connections, bonds made possible by empathy, the ability to love and to share the feelings of others. But our policies routinely violate the biological reality of empathy, and that's destructive. So we need to ensure the paradigm shift from asking what is wrong with you to understanding what happened to you. So when we have the right framework, we can change future outcomes. Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, I am a TED Talk junkie. This is a powerful TED Talk of a pediatrician in Northern California who integrated trauma-informed care in her medical practice. So if you think about this, we can change future outcomes if we can implement trauma-informed approaches, which would include understanding the impact of trauma on the brain. Thank you.